Hey everyone, this is Elenbaas from Nightlight Astrology. Today we are going to take a look at Mercury turning retrograde and immediately going into a conjunction with Mars in the sign of Sagittarius. This is easily the most dramatic Mercury retrograde of the year, and you're not going to see a Mercury retrograde like this very often because when the planet stations to turn retrograde, it's always a moment of astrological interest for us. We're always tracking that moment and seeing what house and sign it falls in and what meaning a retrograde cycle might bring. But when it happens in an exact conjunction with Mars, that's a very powerful starting point for Mercury retrograde. So we're going to take an extra close look at that today. We're going to do some horoscopes tomorrow. Jupiter is also turning retrograde this week and is the host of this Mercury-Mars dynamic, the Mercury retrograde, hosted by a Jupiter who's also turning retrograde. So that is something else we're going to look at as the week goes on. But this is our starting point for today. So I will also today be telling you what's on my altar for the week. I'm going to be doing some horoscopes for all of the double-bodied signs or the mutable signs, looking at those angular house positions, but horoscopes for everyone tomorrow. So before we get into it, remember to like and subscribe, share your comments and reflections. When you subscribe, it really helps us grow as a community. So if you watch regularly, but you are not yet subscribed, see if you can't help us. And we're trying to get to 100,000 subscribers on the channel by next summer. You can find transcripts of any of these daily talks on the website, which is nightlightastrology.com. Our major promotion for the day is our first year course, which begins this weekend. You have just a few days left this week to register for our class, Ancient Astrology for the Modern Mystic. Go to the courses page, click on the first year course, scroll down to learn more about it. There is an informational video, which you can also find right here on the page, that will be tagged on to the end of today's content, telling you everything you need to know about our first year class in Ancient Astrology. I'm very excited to begin a new course of study. At the bottom, you will find enrollment options. And although the early bird payment rate is that sale has now passed, you can still check out the need-based tuition option. If you're someone who would like to take the program, but you need a little help to make it happen, you're on a fixed or limited income, exchange rates are high, you're a single parent, you're in between jobs, whatever the case might be, all that we require is that you have a sincere desire to study astrology and that you need a little help. So if that's the case, use the tuition assistance button. Tell us what rate would work for you within the sliding scale we suggest. If that sliding scale doesn't work, there's an option that says need more help, and you can always click on that too. If the sliding scale doesn't work, sometimes people are in real extreme situations. We understand that. So anyway, please do take advantage of that. We hope to see you in class soon. It's a really auspicious time to study astrology. I like to talk about the best reasons for studying astrology with our program. And the one that I want to talk about today is the fact that Pluto and Uranus are trine to one another throughout most of the program you're going to be taking in the signs of Aquarius and Gemini. That is a very powerful transit that can really accelerate the way in which you're learning something like astrology. And so it's a very auspicious time in which to be studying this kind of content astrologically. It's a nice window to study under. And so consider that and maybe come join us. All right. So on that note, let's turn our attention to the real-time clock and let's take a look at the transits that are taking place the early part of this week and some of what we're going to be covering on the channel. And then we'll go into our conversation for the day on Mercury and Mars with Mercury turning retrograde. So here you can see Monday, November 10th, we have Mercury and Mars getting together in the sign of Sagittarius within 2 degrees as Mercury's turning direct. So today, Mercury's retrograde commences. The station to retrograde, it shifts from stationing to retrograde depending on your time zone this afternoon. So that is where we start our week. But then if we advance this just a little bit, we're going to find that it is about Wednesday, November 12th, that Mercury's retrograde takes it into an exact conjunction with Mars. Now that conjunction is already present at the station point, which is what makes this so powerful. I don't like to make believe that every transit is as powerful as the next, aside from the way we try to title our daily YouTube comments or daily YouTube videos to be compelling and interesting so that people will watch them, which is always something we're contending with. When you watch my videos, you'll know if I think it's a big deal. And you'll know if I'm just kind of like, yeah, this is a part of the weather of the week, whatever, just here's what to watch for. The grand water trine, for example, very powerful dynamic that we've looked at very seriously over the last couple of months because I think it's very significant. And so you can always, you always know on my channel when I think something's a big deal. This is a big deal. The reason that it's a big deal is because when a planet is stationing and not moving and turning directions, that moment is thought of as a moment of great amplified power for the planet as an omen or symbol in our lives. If you're tracking astrology and you consider these movements of patterns in the sky to be oracular, then you know there are certain conditions that planets move through that really make them pop as oracles, signs, omens, symbols. Stationing is one of them. And so when a planet stations and turns retrograde in particular, that is thought to be a moment in which the planet represents a major shift of consciousness, a major shift of circumstance, a major shift or change of mind, or the flow or ordering of events or sequence of events takes a dramatic turn. It represents something like a plot twist. And so we're going to be doing some horoscopes tomorrow where we look at that whole sign house of Sagittarius for all 12 signs. This is a really good time to be doing some horoscopes, so we'll do that tomorrow. Today, I'm going to give you a list of things to watch for, given that as this change of direction is taking place, it's happening within an engagement range, 3 degrees, of a conjunction with Mars in Sagittarius. Mars is a malefic, and so this has the opportunity for a turning point, a change or twist of plot, circumstance, mind, a shift of direction that comes with every Mercury retrograde, but one that is very pronounced because of the close conjunction to Mars. I'll give you the list of what to watch for in a second, but let's just track this a little bit more. So this conjunction happens by Wednesday. So the stationing today is in close proximity with Mars, but the gradual move, I mean, Mercury's barely moving between now and Wednesday. So that station point lasts 4 or 5 days typically before the planet starts picking up speed in retrograde motion. And as that's happening, anything the planet contacts while it's barely moving and changing directions becomes a major part of the retrograde story. In this case, let's say the next 3 weeks worth of retrograde revisions or changes or plot twists is therefore toned dramatically by this conjunction with Mars. So the conjunction with Mars perfects on Wednesday. So we're going to anticipate that this list of things that we're going to watch for, which I'll give you in a second, will be peaking between now and Wednesday. But then if we give this another several days, we're going to notice that the 3-degree engagement range is present through Friday. So you could therefore say that the station today, the exact conjunction with Mars Wednesday, and the gradual separation of Friday will make this a very eventful Mercury retrograde kind of week. That to me is the simplest way of putting it. Now, as the week goes on, the other part of this that is sneaky powerful is the fact that as Mercury and Mars are meeting and Mercury's changing directions, and as I just explained, sort of broadly speaking, why that's so epic, the other thing that's super interesting is the host. So anytime planets are doing something and they're not in their home signs, but what they're doing is very dramatic. Mercury changing directions in a conjunction with Mars here is very dramatic, but neither of them are in their own home signs. I want to point out to you that in the early degrees of Sagittarius, they find themselves in the bound of Jupiter. And Sagittarius as a sign is also the sign of Jupiter. This makes Jupiter the host of these dramatic events. What is Jupiter doing? Well, Jupiter is in great condition. By sign, it's exalted. So we have a very potent Jupiter. Jupiter is in its exaltation, and in the sign of Cancer right now is in its own bound. So we're talking about planets that are beholden as Mercury's turning retrograde in conjunction with Mars, beholden to Jupiter with bound and rulership that Jupiter has. Jupiter in turn is exalted and in its own bound. However, Jupiter is stationing. Jupiter is turning retrograde, which means Jupiter is also not moving. and Jupiter's turning retrograde just as Mercury is. The other thing that makes this very interesting is the fact that Jupiter does not see Sagittarius from the sign of Cancer. This means that the very powerful host is not, it does not have a line of sight to the retrograde, and itself is ceasing its motion and turning retrograde. That dynamic makes this very interesting and something that we are going to break down as the week continues. So what you can expect is tomorrow we'll get horoscopes. Wednesday, probably Thursday as well, we're going to take some time to look at the meaning of Jupiter's retrograde in a vacuum, but also as the host of this very important retrograde dynamic. All of that is specifically why I say that this Mercury retrograde is the biggest of the year. It really is. There's no other retrograde for Mercury that I looked at this year on the channel that I think compares to this one in terms of its strength. This is a very potent Mercury retrograde. So on that note, and I certainly don't mean for that to sound ominous, let's talk practically about what we might watch for. And here it's it really is my hope that this will be something that gives us wisdom and foresight so that we can meet the challenges, if there are any, with greater awareness. And we can also look for the potential positives because, there's nothing worse than astrological anxiety for those of us who pay attention to this stuff regularly. Okay, well, my list of 5 things to watch for begins here. A retrograde, a station to retrograde from Mercury will often involve more dramatic and dynamic turning points. By that, what I mean is when something is heading in one direction and suddenly circumstances, or you might call it the plot line, twists and turns. And there's a feeling of it being not the direction that you thought things were heading in. There's usually a feeling of a little bit of surprise or shock, or like, ooh, that was a twist. Didn't see that one coming. That's very common for Mercury retrogrades, Mercury stationing to turn retrograde. The retrograde period itself often is a little bit more stable than the actual station to retrograde, which is where that initial turn of events or plot twist occurs. So when you have a dramatic turning point or plot twist that's taking place in a conjunction with Mars, one of the broad meanings is that this can be a dramatic turning point that is fueled by misfortune or adversity. Now, the reason for that, and putting it in these big, broad, general terms, is that Mars is, broadly speaking, the ruler of misfortune. Mars rejoiced in the 6th house in ancient astrology, which was called mala fortuna, or bad fortune. What is bad fortune? Well, bad fortune is nothing more than things not going the way we wish or hope or desire them to go. And Mars in this way is just anything from a stubbed toe on your way to the kitchen where you didn't see that coming and that hurt and that sucked, to a contract not going through as you hoped it would, not getting a job that you were hoping for, you thought you were a shoo-in, getting a cold right at a moment where you really can't get a cold. Most of the time, the stuff that Mars brings our way is the most common garden variety misfortune of life, the just shitty luck or adversity of circumstance that we all deal with regularly. It's amazing to me how you can sort of track the shape of misfortune by the transits of Mars through your birth chart. For example, when Mars goes through your 7th house, you may find that you're just naturally experiencing a little bit more tension or hostility with a partner, spouse, or within interpersonal dynamics. There's more conflict or confrontation or power struggle. And that for a little bit just happens to be the shape that the hard stuff is coming in. There's always hard stuff. It's always changing, and it's not every day, and it's not all the time every day. But the little currents of misfortune or adversity that we deal with in the most mundane, everyday ways is the territory of Mars, and traditionally speaking was the territory of the 6th house from a house standpoint. It's a part of life. It builds character. I know that sounds kind of cheesy, but it does build character, because when we meet adversity with patience, with acceptance, with equanimity, with poise, we are developing all of the qualities that have traditionally been associated with warriors, feminine or masculine, with knights, with courage, with heroes, with people who know how to persevere, who know how to overcome, who know how to rise up, who know how to persist. All of those qualities are Mars qualities that are always a part of the adversity that we face if we face them from the standpoint of our heart and our best self. So just because a dramatic turning point comes up, Mercury conjoins Mars at this dramatic retrogradation point, and we might feel like there's conflicts or adversity is showing up somehow dramatically or unexpectedly. Gosh, your car breaks down and you just can't afford that bill right now to go get something fixed. Gosh, something unexpected comes up and it forces you to have to take on more responsibility at work because someone else is out. Dramatic, unexpected, creates more work for you than you'd like. So the question is not just look for bad shit to happen, but in a moment like this, I think a really good question is what inner reservoirs of strength, of determination, of spirit. Sagittarius is a sign that has been associated at times with overcoming great odds, rising up against adversity. There's a long history of the sign being associated with marathons and great acts of spiritual endurance to overcome darkness. This is a sign that takes us into the deepest part of the darkness in the Northern Hemisphere's solar story of the year, only to usher back in the rising of light. So Sagittarius has a long history of being associated with overcoming adversity, with endurance, and with redemption. And so I wonder, not just what unexpected bad shit is going to come up this week, but what are the inner strength, or what's the inner strength or the reservoirs of spiritual energy that we can call upon to meet this misfortune or adversity, tap into the warrior spirit, overcome, be patient, be wise, be strong. These are opportunities. I mean, there's nothing, I'll never forget, like Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, some of my favorite basketball players who are the GOATs, and they talk about how they have viewed adversity in their careers. Adversity provides me with a moment to be great. Egotistically, it doesn't mean to just win or to be better than other people. It means to rise up and reach my own potential. I need adversity to give me that opportunity. Can we see it that way this week? It's easy for me to sit here and pump everyone's tires, but if it hits me, I'm out. All right, number 2, a bold or decisive change of mind or belief. When Mercury retrogrades in the sign of Jupiter, Jupiter's also turning retrograde at the exact same time, and Mercury's meeting Mars at the turning point. I wonder if this isn't an inflection moment for something we think or believe, or how we perceive or judge something. Paradigmatic changes, ideological changes, philosophical changes, change of our ethical, moral, or spiritual compass can occur in a retrograde like this, sometimes in very pointed or dramatic ways, because let's say there's a conjunction with Mars. So bold or decisive changes of mind or belief. What does this week provide you with from the standpoint of revising or reflecting upon your most pointed or your convictions? That's what I'm trying to say. Sometimes our convictions we need to double down on. Sometimes we need to take ourselves less seriously. Sometimes we need to open our minds a little bit more and become more tolerant. And a moment like this could be a moment of conflict or mediating conflicts of belief between ourselves and others. Mars is the god of conflict. Mars, Mercury in a Jupiter-ruled sign. Again, while Jupiter's turning retrograde, are we being asked to reconsider, revise, reflect upon our beliefs and convictions, to soften them, or perhaps to double down? Really, this is a moment to walk your talk. So consider that. Number 3 would be sabotage, conflict, or hostility confronted. So if someone's trying to undermine you or attack you, if someone is moving into direct conflict with you, or you're experiencing some level of hostility, first of all, be careful of the potential for to do that to other people, ourselves. Not that any of you are saboteurs, not that any of you are the kind of people who would go out looking for conflict or acting hostile toward others. But I reflect upon how easy it is when I'm driving and I'm maybe not in the greatest mood because of, I don't know, maybe the privacy of being in one car and I can't see the faces of the other people driving. And we can all act like idiots when we're driving sometimes. Like, I wouldn't say I get road rage, but any of us are capable of like flipping someone off or, cutting someone off on the, whatever. Be careful of the part of you who's like, can be a bit of an asshole in the way you drive your life vehicle. Because it's possible that we sabotage others, that we create conflict for others, or that we become a hostile presence. We don't need to do that. How can we be a brave, supportive, empowering, emboldening, courageous voice, an encourager? Because these fire energies and Mercury-Mars can be the voice of, you can do this. Encouragement over conflict. But watch, because if you experience sabotage, conflict, or hostility, the question for the week is, how do you handle it? How do you respond? I love, by the way, I'm just going to share with you guys a new book I've been reading. This is Benabel Wen's The I Ching. This is the best version of the I Ching I think I've ever read, and I have read many. I have a collection of I Ching translations, probably a dozen. And because the I Ching is a very regular part of my personal oracular practice. It's not what I teach others, but it's honestly, I work with the I Ching almost, if not more regularly sometimes than I do my own birth chart. Anyway, this is a great oracle. If you've never worked with the I Ching, one of the things that the way that it works, one of the great ways that it works is to, when faced with conflict or adversity or someone sabotaging you or creating drama in your life, or a point of real conflict and adversity hits you, is to ask, what is the Tao of this moment? Which means, what is the aligned way of experiencing this experience, of being in it with wisdom and virtue and goodness and an elevated consciousness? Can we dare to ask that question in the midst of turmoil, when it's much easier to react, throw our hands up, get pissed off, blame someone, try to win if someone presents us with a conflict, get self-righteous because we feel wronged, none of which are usually the way. So it's a good, if you practice the I Ching, good week to consult the Yarrow stocks or throw your coins. A good week if adversity comes up, to ask yourself the question, if I take seriously a path of spiritual enlightenment, then at some point when shit happens that I don't like, I have to pause and start asking myself, what is the right way to handle it? Even if I can't follow through, at least pausing to ask the question is a starting point that starts a good habit that then calls in the aid of the sage, whatever form that takes, if it's angels or whatever. There's so many forms of help, but when we start asking for the help and when we start asking for the way, it starts a process in our lives that can really dramatically shift how we handle the difficulties of life as they arise. So consider that this week. All right, well, as we are moving along here, I want to take just a brief moment to pause and tell you about my talk that's coming up on November 13th. Speaking of conflict and adversity, we're talking a lot about Mars today, but I'm giving a talk on November 13th called Pairing the Planets, Venus's Many Faces. This is November 13th from 7 to 9 p.m. Eastern. I would love for you to attend and check it out. You can register under the live talks link, which is in turn under the events tab. Check this out, register to attend. If you can't attend, you get the recording afterward. In this talk, I'm going to be telling you about Venus as an archetype, which means a philosophical first principle. The gods were thought of as aspects of the intelligence of reality itself, or of divinity or God itself, all like faces of God or divinity. What does Venus tell us about the nature of reality itself? When you address this question as an astrologer, you are getting down to a root level of what Venus is, beyond things like love or sex or marriage or style or taste or women or the goddess, all of which are real manifestations of a philosophical first principle in ancient astrology. So What we're going to do in this talk is tell you about that first principle and then tell you how it pairs with all the first principles of the other planets. When you have that kind of understanding, you have a very advanced level at which to start working with planets and pairings in charts. So anyway, I hope to see you there. All right, moving on, as we're looking at this Mercury-Mars conjunction, the fourth thing on my list is ideological, cultural, or familiar ancestral conflicts or significant changes happening in groups or families. The reason that I say this is that Mercury, Mars in a Jupiter-ruled sign, well, Jupiter's in Cancer and turning retrograde in Cancer, could mean that your beliefs, your convictions, we were just talking about changes of mind or belief, but those changes of belief or orientation, politically, religiously, morally, could be fueled by something that's happening or changing at home or in groups that serve as cultural or like ancestral and familial bonds in your life. And again, that's because Mercury and Mars in Sagittarius can reflect such ideological or almost like philosophical changes, dramatic inflection or turning points in what we think or believe or our convictions, but they can be so closely connected to family bonds or emotional bonds, emotionally bonded communities of people in our life, or relationships with family members or ancestral, let's call them ancestral storylines. And again, that's because Jupiter's turning retrograde in the sign of Cancer as the host of this meeting between Mercury and Mars. So I would not be surprised to see that some of these dramatic turning points we've been talking about are tied into Jupiter and Cancer-like things. So watch for that. All right, number 5, a bold or dramatic comeback. The reason I love this is that Mercury's retrograde can mean a shift of direction or a change of momentum, but can also mean things that are coming back. Things that have gone on that take a turning point and come back. For example, Mercury retrograde in the 7th house, classic example is you get back in touch with an ex. It's so simple. But getting in touch with something from the past. Well, with Mars, the god of conflict or victory, it's interesting that this can mean something that you felt like was lost, that you go back to and you win. In sports, in other words, using it as a kind of sports metaphor, Mercury turning retrograde and hitting a dramatic conjunction with Mars could signify a comeback, a dramatic shift of momentum or a change of direction. Someone who was down on the mat gets up off the mat. I think this could be a sneaky interpretation. Like it's not the most obvious, but I think it's there. Something that feels like it's defeated or its time has expired, or you feel like you've come to the end of something or reached its limit, suddenly is revived or resuscitated. I could pair this alongside of the fact that Jupiter is also turning retrograde in its exaltation to mean that there's maybe not dramatically, but in a more process-oriented way, not acutely, but in a more process-oriented way, a comeback is underway. A comeback is underway would mean that something is going to be revitalized that you thought maybe was over or dead, but it's going to start making a comeback. It could do so very dramatically as Mercury and Mars get together, but given that Jupiter, the host, is also turning retrograde, such a slow, dense planet like Jupiter, I could see there being a comeback that takes a little while. So keep all of those things in mind. I want to show you what's on my altar. And then we're going to, or actually, we'll do it. Let's do this. Well, before I do that, let's take a look at the horoscopes. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take the Mercury-Mars conjunction. I'm going to eliminate everything else from the chart. So we just have those. We're going to take a look at this in the angular houses, which are the double-bodied signs. I'll be doing horoscopes for everyone tomorrow, but just briefly, if you're a Gemini rising, this is taking place in the house of love and relationships. That angular house is so powerful. So pay close attention to what's changing or happening in the more interpersonal sphere of life. Happiness and emotional fulfillment, sexuality with other beings, especially interpersonal dynamics. Now we go to Virgo rising, the next double-bodied sign, and Mercury and Mars, and the retrograde is taking place in the 4th house of home, family, the private sphere of life, the inner sphere of life, roots, living environment, parents, ancestral karma. Watch for the shifts we've been describing today to take place there. If you're a Sagittarius rising, this is taking place in the first house, which is your health, your body, your identity, your character and makeup. This could be a really interesting moment for self-reflection. Who am I? What do I believe? How do I appear? How do I come off? How am I changing the way I think or perceive or communicate or show up in the world? Now, with respect to Pisces rising, the meeting of Mercury and Mars, or the retrograde, is in your 10th house, the place of career, public facing, visible, vocational. This is that very public place of the 10th house. So watch for the changes to be happening in the workplace or with respect to conflicts or authority in the workplace, role and responsibility, and overall life direction within that sphere of the public 10th house. Okay. So I always like to hit those angular houses on a Monday so that you have a heads up if you're getting the big transit of the week. In the angular house, what I want to do now is show you what's on my altar this week. And this one for me has actually been, it seems simple, but it's actually been kind of represented like a breakthrough for me. So you'll notice that in the middle of the front of my altar are a set of prayer hands. They actually are a part of my altar that are typically in the background. But I put the prayer hands up front because something that's been happening for me lately, as I've had this long extended period of Jupiter being basically just sitting on my sun, because it slowed down within a couple degrees of my sun, and now it's stationing retrograde on my sun. I've been spending a lot of time thinking about how to be a good dad. I've told you guys a little bit about that in some recent weeks. Put my cell phone away. It's felt like a very illuminating time for me. And I've been just very grateful for the transit overall. Something that happened recently that I realized is that there's a stream of consciousness that I'm sure you're familiar with that's running through your head like it is mine. Every day you just have an inner dialogue going on. You're reflecting on things, you're thinking through things, you're talking to yourself, pepping yourself up, calming yourself down, whatever the case might be. You're managing the inner council of voices. One of the things that I've been finding to be of such help, and it's something that has come and gone in my life, especially when I was in mantra meditation daily for several hours over a long period of time in the bhakti yoga period of my life. I would often just take a moment to give whatever I was thinking up to God. Now, God, goddess, divinity, higher self, whatever language you're comfortable with. But I encourage you, these prayer hands are on my altar this week because it's a reminder for me that when I'm having that inner dialogue, at any point, although I believe God is there and in that dialogue already, taking a moment to just acknowledge, like, hey, God, thank you for being here with me as I'm considering all of these things, as I'm thinking through them, as I'm trying to manage things with the best parts of me that I can find. Would you help me? Just help me be the best version of myself in this situation that I'm reflecting on. Give me the best thoughts. Give me the best advice if you have time. And if I find myself doing that just for a couple of moments in a day, as the dialogue is going on, and then I get back to the dialogue, I come back to myself, and I find that new voices, new insights appear more regularly. And those insights typically feel inspired. They feel divine because I've taken a moment to acknowledge God in the midst of the conversation. God's there all the time in my perspective, but taking a moment to acknowledge that I'm with God and that the divine is with me really allows for me to hear new thoughts, new voices, new direction. And I'm finding that is just such a powerful little thing to acknowledge. We can go through a lot of days trying to be the wisest version of ourselves, really trying to be illuminated from within. It helps so much to acknowledge while we're doing that the gods are with us. And just that little second of recognition changes so much. The benefit we receive is exponentially greater than the amount of effort it is required to simply acknowledge that divinity is in our midst. So that's grace as far as I'm concerned. Anyway, Remember that if you want to come study with us this week, we start this weekend. There's still time to register. Use the need-based tuition if you need a little help. Pluto's going to be trine Uranus throughout the program throughout the next couple of years. It is a very good time to study astrology. In terms of an auspicious election for the study of astrology, this is about as good as I've seen in my career. I really do believe these planets in their alignment in a trine make astrological learning a very potent part of what's happening right now collectively. I feel that the realm of astrological wisdom has the opportunity to become more prominent and just better represented or understood or appreciated in sort of the same way that yoga started becoming more broadly accessible for people. So if you want to be a part of that moment and part of the transmission of that moment, I urge you to come study with us. I think we have a great space to do that. All right, that's it. Hope you're having a great day. We'll see you again tomorrow. Bye. Hey everyone, thanks for sticking around. I'm excited to tell you about our upcoming program, Ancient Astrology for the Modern Mystic. This is our first year course in Hellenistic astrology, and it begins again this November. In this video, I'm going to tell you about the course, the format of the course, and how to register. So let's go ahead and get into it. What is this course about? Well, if you are not familiar, ancient Hellenistic astrology is the earliest and original form of horoscopic astrology. All of the subsequent forms and schools of astrology that have existed over thousands of years come from these philosophical and theoretical roots. And so what you're doing when you study Hellenistic astrology is you're going back to understand the why behind absolutely everything. Why were there ever such a thing as houses and signs in the first place? How were the planets ever assigned to rule various portions of the zodiac in the first place? How do you use the categories of essential dignity, and why were they ever created in the first place? If you're someone like me, you like to know the why behind things, because once you understand the why, then you know how to use things more intuitively. So really the point of Hellenistic astrology, in my opinion, is not so much about going back and becoming a traditional astrologer or just being traditional for the sake of being traditional, as much as it is about grasping the roots of the entire system and paradigm. When you understand those roots, you have more intuition and understanding, which allow for you to be much more artful and fluid in the way that you speak the language of astrology. We call this class Ancient Astrology for the Modern Mystic because while it is about going back to understand the philosophical, theoretical, technical roots of the tradition, it's also about fluidly bridging those things with modern astrology and all of its most unique contributions. For example, modern astrology has given us so much psychological depth and personal depth. And so in a modern astrological setting, you're going to get the ability to explore your own character, your own psychology, and you're going to be able to utilize astrology for a process of healing and personal transformation. But when you pair that with ancient astrology, and it's almost like predictive karmic analytics, you really have a full toolkit to work with. And so that's also a great mission of ours at Nightlight, is to bridge ancient and modern forms, which is why we call the program Ancient Astrology for the Modern Mystic. So that's just a little kind of overview of the program. If you want to know more about the specifics of the curriculum and of the syllabus, what I encourage you to do is go over to nightlightastrology.com, click on the courses page, go to the first year course, scroll down, and you'll see this over 12 months you'll learn about. And here you're going to see more of a detailed breakdown of the curriculum itself. I can promise you that if you've studied astrology in modern context, but you've never gone back to the ancient roots, while some of these topics may look familiar to you and you go, oh, I've already learned about that. Unless you've studied them from the Hellenistic perspective, I guarantee that you are not going to be familiar with this content. Hellenistic astrology is mind-blowingly new and interesting for most people. And if you've never studied it, again, don't assume that anything on this list is something you're going to be familiar with. In that way, the program is really ideal for a variety of different people, and I'll say more about that in a second. So what is the format of the course? Let's go to that next. Scroll down and you're going to see that the course includes 30 online webinars that I lead throughout the year. Over the course of a year together, I have 30 classes that are broken into different units of material. In between those classes, we have breakout study sessions with your course director and 2 TAs. they're going to lead you through Q&A sessions and tutoring sessions to make sure that you have a lot of support in between major units of study. In addition, we also have an interactive group forum discussion where you can ask questions year round and get an answer within a business day in the student forum, where a lot of people also connect and build community. Lots of people in that forum also develop like little meetup groups outside of class. That's very common in all of our programs. It's a very community loving, warm space where anyone's also welcome. Throughout the course, you're also going to find that for every lesson, if you're just there as a hobby student, you can just listen to the webinars. They're all recorded for you. So if you can't make the live webinars, everything is housed on the website as recordings. I'd say about 40 or 50% of our students are going to be following along at their own pace, whereas the other half might be attending the live webinars. But it's really kind of, you know, if you can attend a few and then 1 week you got to be gone, the recordings are always there. You have lifetime access to everything in the course, so it's not a big deal. For every lesson as well, if you're someone who wants to go really, really deep, maybe you have the intention to practice professionally, this course is set up with an optional certification exam at the end from our school, from our program. So you can, you know, if you want to build that resume and develop the credentials from our programs, you can do that, but you also, it's optional, so you don't have to. And outside of every lesson, we have recommended reading. We have supplemental bonus content, all of which is optional, but it's there for people who might want a lot more, whereas some people will take the webinars themselves, and that'll be plenty. So it's really flexible in that way. Also, this is one program within 4 years of curriculum that are meant to go together. And so most people who come through our first year program will end up taking our second year program, where we develop forecasting and prediction and transit tracking techniques. Our third year program, which is aimed at counseling and psychology. So psychological counseling skills is our third year program. And then the Oracle Within, which is our exploration of the philosophical, spiritual roots of the divinatory oracular tradition of astrology. So there's a lot of material there. We also have another 1 year program in horary astrology for some people who want to add that predictive tool to their toolkit. So there's just a lot of material at Nightlight that this class is actually just one part of, which can be taken standalone, or for some people, they get into it, they're going to love it. You're going to hang out with us for 3 or 4 years worth of content. This program is ideal for a number of different types of students of astrology. I'll say that for starters. So let's see here. I'll stop sharing this. So we have there's a profile of the typical students who come through our courses. One is going to be people who just want a very guided introduction to ancient astrology because you've never had it before. Maybe you're only familiar with modern, and you want that guided, structured approach to learning traditional for the first time. Also, people who are brand new to astrology in general, there's no better place to start than at the roots of the ancient foundations. So whether you're a total beginner or just a beginner to Hellenistic, this is a great place to start. If you are someone who's been around astrology for a long time, but you've never had a guided, structured approach to Hellenistic astrology, again, this is a great place to start. I promise you, Hellenistic is very different than what you're familiar with, and you're going to need a guided and structured approach at some point in time. I also think for people who are looking for a lineage, which means not just a bunch of information, but a practitioner-specific based approach where you get to see a practitioner work with clients. You get to hear how a practitioner has prioritized different techniques and why. You're going to get a structured, spiritually grounded focus at Nightlight as well, where if you're looking for someone who practices astrology but also values grounded everyday spiritual practice, that's Nightlight. If you want a community that's been in the industry for a long time now, this is our 16th year of teaching programs and guiding students through trainings. So all of those things, if they matter to you, this is a great place to study. It's a warm community atmosphere. It's spiritually grounded. It's focused. It's academically rigorous. It's going to provide you the appropriate preparation for practicing professionally, especially if you go through all of our programs. But also for those who are just curious and love astrology for your own personal interests, this is going to be a great place for you to learn and grow and thrive and feel like you have a lot of support around you in the curriculum, the teachers, the community, as you're developing, what might just be a personal interest or spiritual hobby. So that is who it's ideal for. Finally, how you register. You go over to the website. I'm going to take you back there. And it's at the bottom of the first year page. You're going to find that the early bird rate is in effect until October 24th. You can save significantly off the cost of the course when you use the early bird rate, where you can pay in full, or use an early bird installment rate plan. Both are going to save you off significantly off the cost of the course. But also at Nightlight, it has always been our mission to make sure that astrological education is accessible for everyone. So please, if you are someone who would love to take this course, but maybe you can only afford a small amount of tuition per month, use the tuition assistance. It is there. All you got to do is plot, you fill out the little form, you tell us your situation. If you're on a fixed income, if you're on a limited income, if you're part-time, if you're in between jobs, if you don't make a lot and you're on that fixed budget, we understand. We don't want people to hurt themselves trying to study something that is spiritual that we feel should be very accessible for everybody. So if you're someone who could use a little help to make this program happen, for whatever reason, maybe you're a single parent, or you're on disability, or you're retired, or you're on a fixed income, whatever the case is, use that tuition assistance. Also, people in other countries who have extreme, exchange rates. We get it. So just use the tuition assistance, and we'll be glad to make sure that the price point is accessible. For us, as a spiritual topic, we're a business at the end of the day, but we believe that this is a spiritual topic. And so accessibility has been a part of our model for 16 years now. We've never not had one of our training programs with affordable sliding scale-based prices for people who need it. So please take advantage of that. It's all there for you. I hope to see you in classes soon. And if you have any questions about the program whatsoever, direct them to us at info@nightlightastrology.com. And I hope to see you all coming up here in November. Take it easy, everyone. Bye.